Muri Vermadin, good morning to you. The language I just spoke is Irish Gaelic. I'm Cornelius O'Keefe. And in case you haven't figured it out, I'm from Ireland. I'm actually from Blarney in County Cork. And I was born in 1827. Actually, I just celebrated my birthday. It was on the 12th of September. So I'm 196 years of age. How am I looking? And I'm still up and moving. And I didn't get up from these graves here because I'm not buried here. I'm an Irish Catholic and I was buried with the Catholics in St. Mary's. But my wife is here. Here's my wife, Anna Lester. She actually is of Scottish and English descent. She's a descendant of Mary, Queen of Scots. I'm known as the Baron. Now, my family weren't aristocracy. Matter of fact, we probably didn't have much refinement, but I married refinement. I went to Virginia City and I met Anna. She was a school teacher over there, and I told her that I would bring her here to Missoula, to my sumptuous palace, and give her a life of luxury. Well, all I had was a kind of a mud cabin. I'd built it, and an Indian friend of mine had helped me. And when she came in and saw that cabin and dirt floor, she nearly passed out. But we had no trains then, we had no cars then, there was no way of getting back to Virginia City, so she was stuck with me. And the only way she could get away from me was when she died. And she came over here, and I went to St. Mary's. She didn't go into the ground with me, my beautiful wife. But I'm here today to talk a little bit about myself because I was raised in Ireland, a troubled country. We had a different government, the foreign government, the English government, and because we were Catholics, we couldn't own our land. We couldn't go and serve in any government. We couldn't participate in any of those things. And then, in the middle of it all, we had a famine. And the famine drove millions of us out of the country and millions more died. I lived through that. I never saw such death in all my life, such heartbreak, family and friends dying around me. And it angered me. I was young. I was 18 years of age when it arrived. So I did what a lot of young men did. I went and tried to defy the government that wouldn't help our people as we died. And I joined a group called the Young Irelanders. You know who was in the Young Irelanders too? Thomas Francis Meagher. You know the guy in the statue outside of the Capitol in Helena? Yeah, he was there too. He and I were friends. And we rose in rebellion, in protest in 1848. And we failed. He was sent to Van Diemen's Land and came here to America. I managed to escape the authorities. I was in prison for a while, but released, but I saw no future. And I left, and I came here to Montana, to the United States initially. And then when I got here, I discovered that Captain Mullen was going to build a trail, and I joined him, and that was in 1859. And I came as far as Missoula, and I was struck by the beauty of it all. And it was spring, and there was something about it that reminded me of home. It just not spoke to my mind, but to my heart, and I felt like I belonged here. So I stayed, and this is where I made my home. I built a cabin out here, just out by the Y, and I began to farm, because at the time we had a lot of miners coming in here to Montana, and they were going to Bannock and they were going to Virginia City. They were looking for gold, and I knew they needed to have provisions, so I began to raise crops from them. What do I know how to produce? I know how to produce potatoes. Oh man, I could grow potatoes in your ear, and potatoes I produce, tons and tons and tons of them. And then with these potatoes, I would load them up and take that hazardous trip to Bannock and to Virginia City, and I had many an adventure. I remember one time I was going, my brother David came out and joined me here, and this was in 1861, and we were traveling over, and we brought with us a Mexican cook, a surly individual, rarely cracked a smile, I couldn't engage in conversation. Of course, he couldn't speak Irish either. He didn't speak English. He spoke Spanish. So communication wasn't great, but by God, he could cook. But we camped the second night, and he built a fire. He was going to make some delicacy to the delight of his own people and serve it to us. But he made this fire so everybody within a 200-mile radius could see it. Now, a band of warriors from the Bannock tribe spotted it, and they showed up. And they saw us, they saw our horses, they saw our food, and they surrounded us. Well, we were completely outnumbered. What were we going to do? They started cooking our potatoes, eating our provisions. They took our horses after they had fed themselves. They took our provisions. They took everything. And then they came and they saw the uniforms we were wearing. And they saw the buttons. So they took the buttons. And then one of them had the audacity to demand my cravat here. I brought this from Ireland. He wasn't going to get that. And I told him, you can take my buttons and you can take my pants, you can take my horses, you can take the whole lot, but that cravat is staying around my neck. And if you know what's good for you, you'll turn and go now. Well, there was an older chief there who saw this and saw my attachment to it, and he intervened, and I was left with the cravat. Not much else, but at least I had the cravat. And we went back and we got more provisions and came back without incident. But we had many encounters with Native Americans. There was a lot about them that reminded me of home. They were struggling to live, struggling to survive, struggling to preserve their language and their culture and their heritage. And there was something about them that appealed to me. And I became very good friends with an awful lot of Indians. An awful lot of them. And a lot of them would come to my home here. Now, some of them would come drunk, and we had some nasty incidents. But others would come as they went on their way to hunt buffalo. And I became very good friends, in particular with the Nez Perce. They would come in and they would spend time. They would camp around my little cabin, and they would come in and they would visit. And they would visit my wife, who seemed very open to them as well, and my children loved them. And they were so delighted by our hospitality. I mean, what were we going to do? I mean, I'm Irish. We would never turn anyone away from the door. But we became very good friends. And the one of these visits, the chief came to me and asked that we become blood brothers, and we did. We became very, very close. Well, we lived there, myself and my wife Annie, and we had 2 daughters, and that's why I'm here this morning. I'm here basically to visit them and talk about them. They wouldn't come with me. I don't think Annie was too pleased with my approach to courting. I promised her something I couldn't deliver on, not immediately. Later I did, but not immediately. So I think she felt deceived, but she was a beautiful woman. She was raised differently from me. Her parents were Scots and English. She had spent time in England. She had received a proper schooling, proper education. She had gone to finishing school, so she was a lady. And she took delight in, higher culture and the company of educated people. She loved poetry. She actually composed poetry. And she passed on that love of poetry and literature to my daughters. And my daughters are buried here as well. One of them, Mary, is Molly. My other daughter, Margaret, Maggie is not. And Mary, Molly as we used to call her, she married Kenneth Ross. And he was a kind of a logger, an entrepreneur, and he became very wealthy and very prosperous. And after my death in the 1890s, they all moved into Missoula with him. My grandchildren are buried here as well. So I'm here with my family, even though I remain, I suppose, with my own people, with the Irish and the Catholics in St. Mary's. But I come here often, and I come here to visit, because when I walk upon these stones, they talk to me, and they take me back. And they bring me back to some beautiful memories here in Montana with my wife and with my children. And some of them, my children, they gave us many great memories, and in many cases, they caused us an awful lot of heartache. My daughter Margaret, Maggie, decided that she was done living with us. She had become very friendly with the Native Americans, especially the Flathead, and she took off one day and decided she was going to move in with them and live with them. She told nobody. I think she was about 8 years of age then. I went up and found where they were camped, and announced that she was going to live with them. And Chief Arley took her in and said, okay, we'll send you over here to Mrs. MacDonald, who didn't really speak much English, but at least had a small bit. And that's where my daughter spent about the best part of a week. And she loved it. But by God, did she cause some heartache. And my poor wife, she couldn't sleep. But eventually, we found her and brought her back. And they grew up to be beautiful women, married well and raised good families. And they too contributed a lot. And their children, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, contribute a lot to the history here of Missoula and of Montana. There's not really much more for me to say, except that I suppose I did cause a lot of controversy. I was raised in a country where you survive with a certain amount of defiance and a resentment towards authority, and I carry that here with me. I became known for, I suppose, basically getting involved in kind of verbal jousts and physical jousts. They say I was the first man to bring a court case here in Missoula. That was over an incident regarding a horse out here in Frenchtown. You know why they call it Frenchtown? Because the place was full of French. If you went out there, you'd swear to God you were in Paris. It was French spoken everywhere. Unless you spoke French, you weren't really going to make much headway. But anyway, one of these Frenchmen arrived at my door one time, tired, weary. He was with his wife. She was a native lady, and they had a horse who was worn out, and he asked me to provide food for himself and his wife, lodgings for himself and his wife, and also to stable and feed the horse. And of course I welcomed him in. What would you expect? And I did tell him, though, to keep the horse away from the oats, which is seed oats, which I'd set aside to plant. I had to go. When I came back, what do you think I found but the horse inside filling himself on the seed oats? Well, I drove the horse out, and the horse galloped off, and he galloped into a culvert and injured himself so badly that we had to put him down. We had to shoot him. Well, the Frenchman wanted $40 for the horse. I couldn't believe it and demanded it. I refused to pay. Next thing, I find myself going to court. Lo and behold, a Frenchman arrives in court, you know, not just with the complaint, but with a lawyer to back him up. No, I knew and anticipated this, so I brought some backup myself. And I went into the court, and the justice was Justice Brooks. We used to call him the Bishop Brooks because he was the guy who used to marry everybody here. And the case began, and the circumstances of the case were presented, but then there were accusation upon accusation upon my character. And this was coming from the lawyer, Woody, Judge Woody. He would become Judge Woody. So I asked him to present his credentials, and he pulled out these cards with degrees from this and degrees from that. And then with a smug look on his face, he said, "Now, Mr. O'Keefe, show me your credentials." And I did, with a good stiff right to the eye, and knocked him out. Well, lo and behold, before you know it, things turned hostile. And a fight broke out. The judge fled, the lawyer fled, the jury fled. And when the altercation was over, battered and bruised, we said we better conclude the case. So we had to go out then, round up the judge, round up the jury, and pull that Woody, snivelling in a corner, back into court. Well, can you believe it? That judge, he found against me. And not only did he come along and order me to pay $40 to the Frenchman, I had to then pay another $50 to cover the cost of the court and the damage that was done. I couldn't believe it. Talk about getting justice in America. Trying to get blood out of a stone. Anyway, but sure, that was the way we were. We had the house here, and I tried to serve the people as best I could. You know, I was raised in a country where there was an awful lot of injustice, so I was very sensitive about that. And I became a county commissioner. But they've disbarred me because I didn't have citizenship. And I appealed to my friend Thomas Marr. He was the governor here. And he wrote back, basically affirming that I could function as a county commissioner, but these guys wouldn't accept it. I think they didn't like it because I was Irish and Catholic. They had that resentment. But I also served in the legislature, trying to do what was right. And I'm glad to say I was one of those that protested against efforts to privatise transport and roads here, ban those tolls. Thomas Maher had done that before as well. He had basically said that if you're going to put in toll roads, only the roads that will make money will be constructed, and we'll have a state with no roads. So he was against it, I was against it. But it was great to be here in this, because I had a lot of my own countrymen here. A lot of them came out at the time after the Civil War, and they were Fenians. You know who the Fenians were? They were the Fenian Brotherhood. And they were set up here basically to organise the Irish to go back and fight in Ireland. And they started doing this back in the 1850s. When we came out here, what we would do was we would get men together and we would train them. Then we go to the state militias and ask them to incorporate these men. So my friend Thomas Downey, he's from Cashel, same place my wife is from. He set up the 2nd Irish Regiment, and they became the Fighting 69th in the Civil War. And Thomas Maher set up the 75th, and we had all these regiments that would fight in the Civil War. But they were also part of the Fenian Brotherhood. So the head of the Fighting 69th, Michael Cochrane, was also the head of the Fenian Brotherhood. These were all Irish nationalists, and there was an awful lot of them out here when I lived here. And it was great to meet with them because they provided you with protection. Because, you know, there was another band of people out here that were not very nice. They were the vigilantes, and I had to deal with them too. They were pursuing a man called Bob Zachary. He was with Sheriff Plummer in Bannock City, and Sheriff Plummer was accused of attacking miners and robbing them and killing people, and he was hanged, and most of his gang were hanged, but some escaped, and one of them came to my home, this man Bob Zachary, and the vigilantes came, and they came into the house and dragged him out, and they were going to hang him on my property, and I stopped them and I said, no way, can you do that? Not in my property, it ain't going to happen. And another thing, you never hang a man on an empty belly. So I insisted that they bring him in and feed him, and they did, and then they took him and hanged him. But we really didn't have much problem with the vigilantes. They kept away because they were afraid of the Fenians, because these were all from the Civil War. Veterans from the Civil War, and a lot of them were what you might call pretty nasty people, probably nastier than the vigilantes, and there were more of them. But I met with them a lot when I would go to Virginia City, and I would meet with them in Bannock, and I always kept that connection with home because I never stopped thinking about home and my people at home and what they were suffering at home. And I think all of us were the same. That's why we had the Fenians, and that's why we were always looking for ways to drive the English out of Ireland. But anyway, that's my story. I'm here to visit my family. They wouldn't go into the ground with me. It's kind of unusual when I think about it because, as I mentioned earlier, my wife is a descendant of Mary Queen of Scots, Mary Stuart. And they were Catholic too, and I thought she would go into the Catholic cemetery with me, but she didn't. But I come here and I walk and I thank God for them and my children and the life I have here in Montana. I have said all I have to say. I have nothing more to say. Thank you all so much.